What's going on, guys? My name is Adam Pearson. I am the host of Adam Talks Politics, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about a video that I've watched a couple of times over the last couple of days. It is the Trump walks out of contentious meeting on shutdown with Democrats. So this is the CBSN version of this. Really, it's just showing the video, so it doesn't really matter who you get it from. But this was the CBSN feed, as you can see there on the screen. So a lot of people are saying that this is the Trump shutdown, and I actually don't disagree with that. The president said that he would be happy and proud to shut the government down. And let's back that up just a little bit. It's not so much that the government is shut down, it is that about 25% of the government is in a partial shutdown. So let's be honest. A lot of people say, well, federal workers aren't getting paid, and that's true. But now let's also think about that. They're going to get back pay. They always have, even during Obama's shutdown, which for some reason the Democrats still call the Republican shutdown because the president was standing firm on the Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. But somehow it still became the Republican shutdown because they didn't agree to it. However, when the tables are turned and the president is doing his own version of the quote-unquote shutdown, where President Obama had the Affordable Care Act. Now President Trump is doing the same thing, but with the border security. But interestingly enough, Democrats are saying that this is the president's shutdown, and I agree with that, it is. But they're also saying that the last shutdown during the Affordable Care Act was also the Republican shutdown, and it wasn't President Obama's shutdown, which is kind of strange. Seems like there is a little bit of hypocrisy there. It's the president's shutdown, and then it needs to be the president's shutdown. Call it what it is: Obama's shutdown, Trump's shutdown. So that's not what this video is necessarily about. It's that the president asked the question, would you support the wall in 30 days? He says that he was going to reopen the government if they agreed to that, and the Democrats said no. Nancy Pelosi says he never said he was going to open the government. He just simply asked if I would be considerate of building the wall. I said no, then he left. So the question that we're going to be talking about at the end of the video here is, whose shutdown is it? And both sides are pointing fingers at each other. So who actually is to blame here, right? So let's watch the video here, and then we'll go from there.
We take you now to the White House. Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer reacting to their meeting with the president.
The president seems to be insensitive to that. He thinks maybe they could just ask their father for more money, but they can't. And we think that the collateral damage that he is causing I'm going to yield to the leader to talk about that. But I would say this, if you don't understand financial insecurity, then you would have a policy that takes pride in saying, I'm going to keep government shut down for months or years, unless you totally agree to my position. I yield to the leader.
Yeah, well, let's actually stop and talk about that for just a second. So a couple of things there. One, she says, unless you totally yield. And from what I understand and what the president has said a couple of times, and it may or may not be true because he does change his mind from time to time, but she just says completely and totally yield. From what I understand, the president went from initially being a concrete barrier now to being a steel barrier. So, and I've heard some other statements from the president where he has said that he's willing to make some concessions, he's willing to negotiate. However, I think Nancy Pelosi's answer to those negotiations back then was, I'll give you $1, which shows that the Democrats, not necessarily the president, are the ones who are completely unwilling to negotiate. So where she says that he says he's going to keep the government shut down unless they completely and totally agree to his wall, I personally believe that is an inaccurate statement. I believe she's lying to us there. I don't think for a minute that she has any interest in doing anything to help secure the border. She says at some point in some of the videos that she would be willing to do more surveillance, more drones, more high-tech stuff. But let's be honest, those things do not prevent people from coming across the border like a wall would. So where she says that there, I don't believe that at all. Another thing she says is that, the president is being immoral because he's, not reopening the border. He's making life hard, that the people can't go to their fathers to get a loan to get through. Let's be honest here. If they would agree to the wall right now, the government would be back open, right? So in this case, it looks like either side, whichever side you pick, are going to be the bad guys. You could be the Republican and say the Democrats, all they have to do is agree to the wall. You could be the Democrats who say all President Trump has to do is agree to take the wall funding out and reopen the government. And you could, depends on which side you fall on, depends on who's actually to blame here. So it looks like maybe they're both to blame, in my opinion, but we'll go into that a little bit more here. Let's finish watching the video and see what they had to say.
Well, unfortunately, the president just got up and walked out. He asked Speaker Pelosi, will you agree to my wall? She said no. And he just got up and said, then we have nothing to discuss, and he just walked out. Again, we saw a temper tantrum because he couldn't get his way, and he just walked out of the meeting. I asked him to open up the government, that tomorrow so many people will have trouble paying their mortgages, paying their bills, dealing with situations when they don't get paid. And I said, just why won't you do that? We'll continue to discuss. We're willing to discuss anything. And he said, if I open up the government, you won't do what I want. That's cruel. That's callous. And that's using millions of innocent people as sort of pawns.
Okay, so let's talk about what Mr. Schumer has to say here. The senator has said that the president is cold and callous, that he's using the federal workers as pawns. Let's not forget that, again, the Democrats could reopen the government and make sure these people get paid if they provided the funding for the wall. So here he is pointing the finger at the president and saying this is all your fault, where he doesn't seem to concede that the Democrats also hold the authority and the power to open open the government back up with some funding for the wall. He says that the president got upset and walked out. He says if you don't agree to the wall, then we have nothing to discuss. Well, the president has made that very clear from the beginning. He said that if you don't provide funding for the wall, I'm not going to reopen government. So why would they continue to sit there and talk around in circles when neither side is willing to concede to the other? The president's very adamant that he will not sign any legislation to reopen the government without that wall funding in there. So if they say they're not going to open the government, or if they say they're not going to provide that wall funding, he's not going to open the government, and he's right. Right, wrong, or indifferent, he's going to walk out, right? So the other thing we need to think about is Senator Schumer said, why won't you reopen the government? Then we will discuss the wall funding. They've made it very clear they have no interest in doing the wall funding. So let's be honest here, just from a strategic point of view and a common sense point of view, if the president was to open the government today and then have Senator Schumer say, well, we'll discuss the wall tomorrow, that's not going to happen. No matter what the president says or does after the government is reopened, there is no incentive for them to provide the much needed funding for the border wall. So he's trying to, and they're both of them are trying to push off all this responsibility and blame and, oh my God, you're a terrible person, look what you're doing to these federal workers, onto the president, when they could very easily have the blame pushed on them too and say, well, listen, and $5 billion, yeah, to me and you, that's a lot of money. That is a huge amount of money, but in the overall spending of our government, that is not a lot of money. They could very easily say, you know what, we're going to give you your funding for the wall, and then let's reopen the government. Now, I don't expect them to do that without some kind of concessions to maybe some overhaul of the U.S. immigration system, because it is very broken, and I've talked about that in another video. However, they're not even trying. And then they're saying, well, we are trying, but the president, he's just being stubborn. He's not trying. Well, the reality of this is neither side is really trying. They both have their one, I want the wall, or screw you, I'm not opening the government, and the other, screw you, I'm not giving you any funding, so if the government stays closed, then so be it. So both of them have that, if the government is closed, so be it attitude. But if you look at the Democrats here, they seem to think that they don't have that mentality. They seem to think that we are the Holy Grail. We're the people who are trying to, we're the crusaders for the people who are missing their paycheck, and they're not. They are really not, because if you look at what they just said, you know, the president's doing this, he's the reason the government's closed. But if the government employees look at them and say, you know what, you guys could give us paychecks tomorrow too, if you were to just give the funding for the wall. It's not what's happening, but let's continue listening to what he has to say.
And it was wrong. And then a few minutes later, he sort of slammed the table. And when Leader Pelosi said she didn't agree with the wall, he just walked out and said, we have nothing to discuss. So he said it was a waste of his time. That is sad and unfortunate. We want to come to an agreement. We believe in border security. We have different views. We've already offered the president our proposals, which has sat on his desk for several weeks.
Okay, so they want to come to an agreement. However, they're not willing to negotiate. It's their way or the highway. And I'm not saying that the president's not the same way. He's got the same mentality. It's his way or the highway. So don't look at this and hear me say that the president is right and that he's not being the same way, because he is. He's being the exact same way the Democrats are, but they're on opposite sides of the fence here. The Democrats, being in the House, they have the ability to craft a spending bill. That's the authority of the House, and they control the House. Spending bills have to originate in the House. So, if they are unwilling to concede to the wall, then they can craft whatever spending bill they want, but the president has veto authority. And that's what I kind of thought was pretty funny with all these Democrats when they were coming in. Ms. Cortez, for one, day one, we're going to reopen the government. Well, that's not happened. So it's kind of like President Trump's border wall. Mexico's going to pay for it all. That's a campaign promise he made, and it hasn't happened. They're not going to pay for it. Well, if you look at it, the Democrats did not open the government. And they should have known, just the same way as President Trump should have known going in, that was not a reality. It wasn't something that they had the authority to do. President Trump could not make Mexico pay for the wall, and the Democrats are not going to be able to reopen the government without an overwhelming support from the Republicans that could override President Trump's veto. And he's told them he's going to veto it. So neither side is willing to move. Both sides are pointing their fingers at one another and saying, you are the reason that these people are not going to get paid. Now let's talk about the government workers for just a second. Government workers, at least on a federal level, no, even on a state or local level, if there's some hiccups or some delay in the spending bills, there's always that potential that they will not get paid. Now, they're just like us. They may or may not get paid well enough to be able to start putting back money. If you do any kind of financial classes, it says that you need to have at least 6 months set aside in case something happens. They are going to get paid back in the future, but I understand and I recognize that, yes, they're going to have some financial difficulties between now and then. And the most likely scenario is these people do not have 6 months worth of savings set aside, because that's just, as much as the elite rich say that that's what needs to happen, the financial planners say it needs to happen, it's not something that can happen. It's not something that I have, and I would wager to say the majority of people who are listening to this, they don't have that either. So, do I feel bad for the federal workers? I do, because they are having some issues now. I do believe that most creditors would look at that and you could show that, yes, you're a federal worker, even your electric company. I would assume there's some kind of provisions in there that they will help you and work with you, and you are going to get paid back. And the reality is, a lot of these people, now some of them not necessarily, but a lot of these people are basically getting a long paid vacation where they're going to get their money back later, not necessarily right now. Some people, unfortunately, are working without immediate pay. Now, everybody has said that they're going to sign a bill, including the president, says you're going to get back paid. But it is a lot of financial hardship right now, and my point to all this is either side could end that right now if they wanted to, but neither side wants to concede to the other. So the president says, give me my wall. Democrats say, hell no. And now we are where we are. The government shut down. Where do we go from here? I don't know, but let's finish listening to Senator Schumer and see if he maybe has some other insights, or if he's just going to do the same thing, which is blame the president for his immoral and callousness when he has the same ability to open the government as the president does. Let's see what he has to say.
But this was really, really unfortunate, and in my judgment, somewhat unbecoming of a presidency.
So what is the breaking point, Madam Speaker?
No, he didn't talk about that, but what I will say is that one of the obstacles that we have to an agreement is a stipulation of fact. What the president is claiming to be the situation at the border is not solved by a wall. And we have been for border security. We take our oath to protect and defend the American people very seriously. And we had suggestions about how we can do it better than a wall in recognition of what the challenges.
Okay, so she says she can do it better than a wall. So, and from other videos, I've heard them say drones, sensors, maybe some more people, better equipment, surveillance equipment. Are those things going to stop people from crossing over? No, they're not. And here's the thing. Once a person has crossed over into United States soil, it is very difficult to deport them. They've got to go into detention. We've got to, as the American people, we have to pay to have them sit there in detention. We don't get to immediately throw them back to the country they just came from. They get all kinds of appeals. They get released into the society while their appeals are working through the system. They're going to disappear. They're going to use false names. They're going to steal people's social security numbers. I've seen this happen a lot. And I think a lot of Americans understand that as well. So where she's saying we support border security through other means, basically that's just absolute nonsense. In order to have border security, you have to have that border wall. Otherwise, people are just going to step foot on here, and now it's going to be very difficult to deport them. They're going to get released during their hearings, and they're going to disappear, and then we're going to have the same situations we have now. Even if you have sensors and such out there, by the time that they catch these people entering, it's too late. Now they're going to be here, and they're going to be stealing jobs from Americans. They're going to be taking, and a lot of people say, well, they're taking jobs that Americans don't want. That's just not true. So the reason that they're taking these jobs is because these people can get paid for their services under the table. They're not paying insurance. They're not paying, not insurance. They're not paying workman's comp. They're not paying for Social Security. They're not paying any of these taxes or anything else. So they're getting paid under the table. They're not paying taxes. They're taking jobs from Americans. They're not supporting the American economy because this money is typically being sent back home to support family back home. And on top of that, they're not supporting the government. So now our taxes have to get raised because these people aren't paying their fair share. But people say, well, Americans don't want these jobs anyway. That's not true. They want a fair wage for these jobs. If you were to make all these people that are working these jobs legal, they're going to want the same pay too, because they can step out of the shadows and they can say, well, I want $10 an hour to pick these fruits because it's very difficult labor. And now they're going to be getting less than they would have made anyway because now they have to pay taxes and all this other stuff on there. So it's not that Americans don't want to do these jobs. It's simply that they want a fair wage for doing it. So they are driving down the wages for American workers. Now, granted, the argument can be made that the farmers and such would have to raise their prices in order to pay a fair wage. But that's not what we're discussing here. We're discussing whether illegal immigrants have any business in the country and do they provide any value, because that's the reality of it. I have to provide a value to the country and to the community, or I'm worthless to the country and the community. I'm just a drain. Same thing with these illegal immigrants. We don't want illegal immigrants here because they are a drain on our economy. And that's pretty much one of the things the president's saying. Yes, there are some drugs and criminals and such that are coming across, weapons and such like that. But even if there wasn't, we don't want that drain from the illegals on our society. And if these censors and stuff pick them up, it's too late because they're already on U.S. soil, and now they get to come in and be released and disappear into the void, and hopefully one day we'll catch them again. So their quote-unquote desire to protect the border and their support of border security is completely a fallacy, and they're just saying that just so they don't look like they don't support it. But let's hear whatever else she has to say, and I'm sure it's just going to be just as enlightening as the rest of the crap she's already thrown out.
There, from a immigration and a drugs, etc., coming into our country. And so that's what's sad. And so I said to him, Mr. President, the evidence of what's happening there.
Let's stop right there, because one of the things that the Democrats have actually said is that it is a manufactured crisis, that these things are not actually happening. But right there, the speaker just said, we want to stop the drugs and et cetera from coming in to the country. So she's admitting, essentially, that yes, this stuff is happening. It's not necessarily a manufactured crisis. She's saying, yes, it is coming in. We want to stop it. We just want to do it a different way. So she just kind of made the president's point there. It does happen, and we need to stop it. But we have a difference of opinion on how we stop it. Let's continue.
It does not support the crisis that you describe, and therefore the solution you suggest, because we have a better idea of how to keep our country safe, and it isn't a wall.
Madam Speaker, what is the breaking? Madam Speaker, what is the breaking?
Go ahead, Stan.
Before you ask more questions, I want to make a point. This is not a partisan difference. This is a policy difference. And I suggested in the White House, in the Situation Room, in the last meeting, that every time we have a policy difference, shutting down the government is the wrong thing to do.
So, kind of like the Affordable Care Act, which they seem to have forgotten about. So he says he's blaming Trump for the shutdown because there's a policy difference. However, where's his upset about Obama shutting the government down to pass the Affordable Care Act? Well, it falls in line with what he wants and his agenda, so he's forgotten about that. Let's continue.
It is taking hostages to accomplish your objective and hurting people in the process. Now,
again, Obama did the same thing.
Of 6 senators and the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives. I'm only going to read you one. Michael McCall from the state of Texas. You have to understand, too, that a 30-foot concrete wall is a very expensive proposition. And there are a lot of other things we can be doing technology-wise to make it a smart border.
Again, the president has made some concessions and said that if a steel wall is cheaper, he'd be willing to do that. But again, these people are focusing on there are other things that we could do with that money. The reality is once they're here, they're here. So unless you're stopping them from coming across somehow, or you're changing the law to where we can deport them much more rapidly and without any kind of hearings or anything, then all these technology increases and everything you're doing are completely useless.
That's more effective and
it's not more effective. Once they're here, they're here. So the only effective way is to prevent them from coming. I don't understand how hard it is for these guys to figure that out.
Cost efficient. That's Michael McCall, Republican chairman of the Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives.
Just because he's a Republican doesn't mean he's not an idiot. So, again, I'll call a spade anytime I see one. Republicans are not the end-all, be-all. We make mistakes. We have some idiots among us. Sometimes that applies to the president himself. But just because you happen to have a Republican who agrees with you doesn't mean that that Republican is of sound mind, and he doesn't speak for the rest of us, okay? I'll say that. Or at least he doesn't speak for me and for a lot of other Republicans. Again, once they're here, so it doesn't matter what kind of stuff you throw up to detect them once they're here, they're still already here.
This is not a partisan difference. This is a policy difference. And it is unacceptable to put 800,000 people at risk, 38 million people on food stamps, millions of people who are expecting to get a refund on their taxes, people who want to use the national parks, people who want to get farm assistance, in the Farm Bill. That is why we have 4 bills on the floor that we're going to send to the United States Senate. Now I want to read you one more quote.
Actually, the cool thing about this is they did send that to the Senate. So this video is a couple days old. They did send it to the Senate, and the Senate Majority Leader pretty much said it's all for show if we vote on these things, because the president's already said he's not going to sign it, he's going to veto it, so I absolutely have no interest in doing it. So they shut that down very quickly in the Senate, and for good reason, because the reality is it doesn't matter if the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate both said, yeah, let's do this. They sent it to the president, he's going to shut it down. He said he's going to shut it down. I absolutely believe he will. I have no reason to believe that he wouldn't do that. So everything that this guy is saying that he's doing is completely showboating, because he knows full well that that's not going to get sent. He just wants another reason to say, look, the president is evil. He's not reopening the government, instead of acknowledging the fact that he could open the government too, just by simply providing funding for the wall.
Of course not. When asked, do you think you ought to shut down government? Of course not, he said. Remember me? I am the guy that gets us out of shutdowns. It's a failed policy.
Now, okay, so President Trump did say that, and I don't know what his response to that is. I haven't heard him say how he feels about that now. He did say that before becoming even a candidate, I believe, at that point. I may be wrong. He may have already been a candidate. In fact, he may have been a candidate, maybe why he actually gave a speech about it. But the reality is the president did say it's a failed form of government, or a failed leadership, and it's absolutely the president's fault. Now, I think if the president's smart here, he's going to say, yeah, you can call it whatever you want. It is, I do accept it. I do own it. It is my shutdown at this point, but it's also the Democrats' shutdown. But, you know, he did say that it is a failure on the upper echelon of the leadership. And if he goes back against that now, I don't really see what grounds he has to stand on. I think that he needs to acknowledge that he said it. I think he needs to acknowledge that it's for the greater good and move on. So with this gentleman here saying that the president said previously that it should never happen, yeah, I think he's right. I mean, he did say that, but I think the president needs to stand firm and say, yes, I did say that. However, I think it's for the greater good, and I'm going to continue to do it for as long as you continue to do it as well.
Mitch McConnell, 2014, CNN. It is a failed policy, and we ought to stop it.
Okay, so I'm sorry. They said that was Mitch McConnell. But I'm pretty sure that the president did say that as well. I'm pretty sure, and I could be wrong. You can fact check me if you want. And in fact, I encourage it. I encourage everybody to fact check everything. So if I'm wrong, then I acknowledge that, and I'll live with it, and we'll talk about it later. But I'm pretty sure that President Trump did actually say, yes, that the shutdown is at the presidential level. So I stand by my other comments, even if he doesn't say it. I think that's still what he needs to come out and say. Mitch McConnell, you know, he could say whatever he wants, and you know, that has no bearing on the president because they're different people. They have different policies. They have different agendas. But so here's my point to you guys, and let's talk about this down in the comments. Do you think that this is President Trump's shutdown? Or do you think this is a Democrat shutdown? And I'll give you that third option there is both of their shutdowns. Also, do you support the shutdown? There's been polls on both sides that say the majority of Americans support this, or they don't support that. They blame this person. They say it's so. A lot of the polls that I see say that they put the shutdown squarely on President Trump's shoulders. It doesn't necessarily. I'm not saying anything that says that it's President Trump's fault and we don't like it. So a lot of the stuff I'm saying is that they are saying this is President Trump's shutdown. So I'm curious, what do you think? Do you think it's President Trump's shutdown? Do you think it's the Democrat shutdown, or a combination of the two? And do you support it, or do you think it needs to be reopened? I'm curious to see what you think about the border wall. I personally think the wall is necessary. I think once the people are here, they're here, and they are draining on the economy at very least, and at most, we do have people who are committing crimes. We have seen illegal immigrants kill legal immigrants. We've seen illegal immigrants kill American citizens. So I don't think they need to be here. For what I have seen personally in my professional careers, a lot of times your illegal immigrants, they may or may not have driver's licenses. A lot of them do not have insurance. They're not driving registered vehicles. And, even on the very basic things, traffic accidents. Now the person who has been hit, if God help them, they have survived, now they have to pay for all this stuff on their own because the person who was driving was actually illegal and they didn't have all the legal requirements to drive, such as car insurance. So on the very bottom of it, you've got a drain on our economy. On the very top of it, you've got, even if one American citizen or one legal U.S. resident is injured or killed or victimized by an illegal, I think that's too many. If that person wasn't here, they wouldn't have been victimized. And, Representative Cortez will tell you, the numbers are very low compared to the amount of U.S. citizens who are committing crimes. And, yeah, that's probably true. But the reality of it is there are a lot more U.S. citizens here or U.S. permanent residents here than there are illegals, disproportionately. So she's not necessarily commenting on the percentages of the two. She's only commenting on the raw numbers. But even if that number is, let's say 1,000, if 1,000 illegal immigrants are causing, rapes, murders, thefts, vehicular homicides, DUIs, any of these things, that number is way too high. It should not be happening. We've got our own problems here to deal with without dealing with the influx of illegal immigrants as well. So I think the border wall is very necessary, and I think that it is a combination of the Democrats and the president's shutdown personally. Now, if you agree with me, let me know in the comments. If you don't agree, I'm welcome to hear what you have to say too. I'd like to see your reasoning behind it. If you would do me a favor and put in a well-thought-out comment rather than you're an idiot and I'm a Democrat and I'm always going to vote for Democrats no matter what the Republicans say, or vice versa. I don't want to see the Republicans calling people idiots and stuff in there. I like to have nice, constructive dialogue, and I like to see what people actually had to think and actually be able to expand on those comments in a reasonable manner. So let me know. And as always, God bless.